Welcome back to another video, and in this video we're going to be continuing on with our iOS development with UIKit tutorial series, and in this particular tutorial we are going to be taking a look at how we can embed SwiftUI views and view hierarchies into a UIKit based application using UIHostingController. Now, if you have been following sorry about that. If you have been following my macOS development series at all, I don't expect that you have, to be clear, but if you have, you'll know that that AppKit has NSHostingController and NSHostingView. You might also know this if you've been following UIKit and AppKit updates at WWDC. But here's the thing. UIKit doesn't have a UI hosting view that is publicly available. It is available as a private API that we technically can access, but we shouldn't. All we have currently available to us in that regard is a UI hosting controller, which frankly is not a huge deal. It's fine, right? We don't need a UI hosting view. We can use UIHostingController just fine. So, as I mentioned, this allows us to embed SwiftUI content, SwiftUI views, and view hierarchies in our UIKit applications. This is particularly useful if you are transitioning an existing UIKit application to SwiftUI. So you can slowly but surely introduce new features as SwiftUI features instead of UIKit, or slowly transition already existing features into SwiftUI and stuff like that. You could also just deliberately mix them together without it being a transition from one framework to another. It really just depends on how you want to use it. Right? It's just another tool in your toolbox. There's no definitive, this is how you must use this, or you cannot use this in this way, kind of thing. It really just depends on what you want to do with your app and how you want it to be architected. So let's kind of talk then about what the application that we're going to build in this video is. Well, in this video, we're going to build an application that displays a segmented control at the top of our app, where one section is for line chart, and then the second is bar chart. We're going to show a chart that takes up most of our screen. It's going to be beneath our segmented control. This chart is going to display United States national debt data by fiscal year. This is data that you can get directly from the United States Treasury. This isn't data I created or anything like that. This is official United States government data. Publicly available on the Treasury's website. And what I've done is I have put that JSON file into my project, and I have created an extension on bundle to load and decode the JSON from that file into a debt object. So if we go ahead and go into Xcode and we take a look at what these objects look like, so here's our debt object. It's pretty much as simple as creating a struct that conforms to decodable, and having a data property that is an array of debt record objects. And if we open our debt record object conforms to identifiable and decodable. Now, we're having this conform to identifiable to make our SwiftUI view hierarchy easier to work with when looping through this array of debt records to display views based on that. So again, debt record conforms to identifiable and decodable. We have a constant ID that gets initialized to a UUID every single time a new debt record object is created. Our JSON has two different keys that we need in this model here for record date. So the date that it was recorded. In this case, that would be the end of each fiscal year, from 1790 to 2024. And then debt outstanding AMT is also a string because that is what our data shows. Our data comes in as a string for the debt outstanding amount. However, we also have a computed property called debt amount that converts that string to a double. All right. And those are our models for decoding our JSON. Now, in order to load this data, I have a data controller class. Excuse me. That all it does is it's pretty much a singleton, where inside of its initializer it loads the data from the bundle, and then sets it to a debt data or a debt variable that we have in our data controller. So let's go ahead and go into that data controller. So we'll say, okay, here we go. All right, so you can see here inside of our data controller, we just have a shared instance. And inside of this class, again, we have a debt object. It's of type optional debt. So this could be optional because maybe we couldn't load any debt, right? So now here we have a computed property called debt data. This is what we retrieve. This is what we retrieve from our main view controller there, and all it's doing is it's pretty much returning either if it's so what it's doing, right? We're using nil coalescing to say, hey, return the debt, our private debt object, if it's not nil, and then if it is nil, then we just return an empty debt object. Right, a debt object with no records. And then, of course, inside of our initializer here, all we're doing is loading our JSON data from our bundle. Right. So let's go ahead and take a look at the extension that I have just to get us started here. So here we have our extension on bundle. Bundle is a class in Foundation that basically allows us to access our apps bundle. Now inside of this we have a method called load and decode. This takes a generic type parameter of t, and t must conform to decodable. We take in the name of the resource we want to load and the type we want to decode it to. So then inside of this method, we're simply loading the data using a load data method that I also have in this extension. And then we are decoding the objects using a decode method that I also have in this extension. And we have it in a guard statement because these can both return optionals. If either of these is nil, we will simply return. So we'll return nil. Otherwise, we return object, the data we decoded. From here, we're loading our data in func load data. We take the resource name, and then we load it using bundle's URL method. Now, of course, URL from bundle, right? The URL method can return nil, so we have it in a guard statement here. If it can't, if it's nil, then it will simply return nil. Otherwise, we return the data object from the URL. And then decode is pretty much just basic JSON decoding, like we learned when we did our network requests. We have a key decoding strategy to convert the snake case to camel case, because that is what our JSON data comes in as, snake case, and because Swift coding convention is camel case, we need to make sure that that gets converted. All right, so that's the setup that we have. So now we can move on to how we actually implement our UI hosting controller. Well, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to actually create that object. We're going to declare it without instantiating it yet, because we're going to instantiate that inside of our configure method, and you'll see why here in a moment. So here we'll say var, I'm going to call it chart VC equals, not equals rather, chart VC colon UI hosting controller with an exclamation point. Now you will get an error in Xcode if you do it this way. Why is that? Well, that's because UI hosting controller has a generic type parameter, and if we don't specify it, it's not going to know what the content of it should be. So we will have less than and greater than there, and then in between the less than and greater than, we will put the kind of content that we want this view controller to display. In this case, the type of view. Now I have a SwiftUI view called det chart, and that's the view that we want this to hold. All right, cool. Now we're not going to go over how the SwiftUI views are constructed because that's kind of not the point of this video. But if you want to know how SwiftUI views are constructed, I urge you to watch at least the first few videos of my SwiftUI series that I have on the channel. All right. So now that we have a UI hosting controller object that we're telling Swift we will initialize later, inside of configure, alright, so above where we have our programmatic constraints, we first need to use a concept called view controller containment to add this hosting controller, UI hosting controller, as a child view controller. And this is a required step to make this work. View controller containment is used quite often. So for example, let's say we have a UI tab bar controller. Well, anything we put inside of its, say, tabs or view controllers property, that uses view controller containment. When we put a view controller inside of a navigation controller, that is view controller containment. It's pretty much just putting one view controller inside of another view controller. And it's one of those tools in your tool belt when you're building UIKit or AppKit applications that allows you to separate concerns. You can separate certain functionality into one controller and then other functionality into another controller, and then combine them into a single controller as necessary using view controller containment. So let's go ahead and first initialize this UI hosting controller object by saying chart vc dot, or chart vc equals UI hosting equals UI hosting controller. Okay, this is self dot chart vc equals UI hosting controller, and then inside of the initializer for our UI hosting controller, we will have a root view, and the root view is going to be an instance of the SwiftUI view that we specified as our type parameter. So it'll be a det chart, and we pass it our det data. So it'll be our det data. And then for the chart type, we're going to have it be line initially. Cool. Perfect. Now, the next thing that we can do let's see here. The next thing we need to do here is we need to import SwiftUI, because UI hosting controller is not something built directly into UIKit. It's built into SwiftUI. So, beneath where we are importing UIKit, we will import SwiftUI. All right. All right. So now that we have our UI hosting controller object, the next thing that we need to do is we need to add this view controller as a child. And we do that by saying add child, and this takes in a child controller. So we can say chart vc. The third thing that we need to do in this configure method regarding our hosting controller is we need to tell the hosting controller that it was moved to our main view controller as a child. So we can do that by saying chart vc dot did move to parent, and we'll just pass it self. So now our chart vc knows that it was moved to a parent controller. Finally, we need to configure the view of our hosting controller. And all we need to really configure is whether or not it has programmatic constraints enabled, and then we need to add its view as a subview to this view controller's view. So we'll say chart vc dot translates or dot view dot translates auto resizing mask into constraints equals false, and then we'll say charts vc dot, actually we need view add subview chart vc dot view. Perfect. Then if you don't have constraints configured already, you also need to activate constraints on that view. I already have constraints activated for this, so that's good. Now we can go down to our action method here for the value changed event of our segmented control and finish that up, because we want to be able to change the chart type. All right, cool. So now inside of this method, we're going to say chart vc dot root view equals det chart. We're going to pass it our det data, and then we're going to set the chart type to the type of constant that I have here. Okay, so I do need to change one small thing here. And that is, instead of hosting VC, chart VC. All right. Chart VC. Chart VC, like that. Save, and we should be good to go. Okay, we do have an error somewhere, so let's take a look at what that might be. Issue navigator here. Okay, yep. Yeah, that's fine. So we should be okay. Let's go ahead and try to run our code. We're going to start on the Mac, though. So let's start on Mac Catalyst. We'll save and run. All right, we have a successful build. And here is our here's our application. Now let's say bar chart, line chart, bar chart, line chart. So we can see that it does in fact change the chart type in our segmented control. Beneath that, of course, you can see our chart. You can do anything with a chart that you would normally be able to do in a native SwiftUI application. Although I want to double check something, because it appears that the bar chart is, for whatever reason, loading as the default. So let's take a look at what might be causing that. Not debt record. Okay. Oh, okay. I set that to bar instead of line. All right, so let's say line. There we go. And then we run it again. There we go. We have a successful build. And now we can see that it chooses the line chart by default. We have our segmented control up above, and then our chart below. Again, we can change it to whatever chart we want. Bar, line, whatever we want. And if you're using VoiceOver, you can enable audio. Like, you can play an audio graph, so you get an audio representation of the chart, which is very cool. Now let's go ahead and run this on my phone here, so we can see what it looks like on the phone. So we'll go into the toolbar. And I want to run it on my phone here. All right, we have a successful build. Let's go ahead and run it on my phone here.
VoiceOver selected.
Oh, okay, I want to make sure that this is working. Okay. I need to enter my passcode because of course I do. All right, cool. Okay, there we go. My phone was being uncooperative. It would not recognize the numbers properly. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and screen mirror for you. Screen mirroring. I want to screen mirror to my Mac here. All right, here we are. So here's our application. It's still trying to load because it takes a little bit. After all, it's in debug mode, not release mode, but still.
Selected line chart. SwiftUI content demo.
All right, so let's go ahead and change the chart type. We can see our segmented control up above and our chart below.
Bar chart button 2 of 2. Selected bar chart 2 of 2.
There's our bar chart.
Line chart button.
There's our line chart.
Line chart.
Let's go ahead and listen to an audio graph.
2009. 2000 characters, audio graph headings, audio graph.
So here's our audio graph rotor.
Describe chart, chart details. Play audio graph.
We can play the audio graph.
Complete.
All right. And that's our audio graph. It'll sound different with the bar chart.
SwiftUI content demo. Bar chart. Button.
So we'll select the bar chart.
2021. Characters. Audio graph. Describe chart. Play audio graph.
We'll play the audio graph. Give it a second. It will take a little bit to load the bar chart. There it is.
Complete.
So that's how we can use a UI hosting controller to host SwiftUI content in our UIKit based applications. Thank you all so very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.